Council. Public hearings of the City Council, including those held jointly with the Board of Survey and Planning, shall be conducted in accordance with the following rules. The first 30 minutes of the meeting shall be set aside for proponents of the pending proposal to speak in favor of the proposal. The next 30 minutes of meeting shall then be set aside for opponents to the proposal to speak in opposition to the proposal. The next 30 minutes, if needed, shall then be set aside to hear testimony from persons whose positions are neutral at this time or who are only seeking information. The same sequence shall be followed throughout the entire hearing, alternating the same 30-minute time sequences if needed to proponents, opponents, and neutral testimony. No person speaking during the time period or the neutral testimony shall argue for or against the pending proposal. Any person in the judgment of the presiding officer is improperly using the neutral period to advance a position in support of or in opposition to the pending proposal shall be ruled out of order. All persons wishing to speak at any public hearing of the City Council shall approach the lectern during the appropriate time period. Considered as evidence in the hearing. After all testimony has been concluded from proponents, opponents, and other interested parties, and before rebuttal, councilors shall have the opportunity to question any person who has presented testimony at the hearing without time limitation. When all questioning by councilors is concluded, one person speaking in favor of the proposal shall be entitled to the rebuttal period not to exceed 10 minutes. At the conclusion of the rebuttal period, one person speaking in opposition to the proposal shall be entitled to the rebuttal period not to exceed 10 minutes. There shall be no questioning by councilors during or after the rebuttal period. It shall be the duty of the presiding officer or his designee at any meeting for which is scheduled one or more public hearings through the rule of practice. It shall also be the duty of the presiding officer to suggest that everyone, whether proponent or opponent, shall be afforded the opportunity to express their own opinion. Excessive needless repetition is to be discouraged.
Mr. Clerk, you should give us the first public hearing.
Yes, notice is hereby given that the City Council and the Board of Survey and Planning will hold a joint hearing in the City Council chamber, City Hall, 610 Main Street, Waltham, Massachusetts, August 5th, 2024, at 7:30 p.m. on the following amendments to the zoning ordinance. Public hearing, MBTA zoning, MGL Chapter 40A, Section 3A, MBTA Community Zoning Proposal Amendment. I, amend zoning district map to create MBTA Community Multifamily Overlay District, comprised of the parcels shown on the MCMOD Overlay District map and parcels. Amend Article 8 to add a new section 8.8, MBTA Community Multifamily Overlay District, MCMOD, as provided below. 8.8. MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District, MCMOD. 8.81, establishment of the MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District. The MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District is hereby established and it's founded and described on the MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District map, and in the written description accompanying said map, both of which are on file with the City Clerk. The Planning Department, Consolidated Public Works Department, the Engineering Department, and with the Inspector of Buildings. The map and written description and incorporated here within reference said MCMOD boundaries shall be superimposed on the zoning district map of the City of Waltham so as to indicate the extent of the MCMOD. 8.811. District boundary determination. In the event of a conflict between the written boundary and the description on the MCMOD, the provision of the written shall control. Where the written description is not clear, the provisions of section 3.142 through 3.145 shall govern. 8.82. Purpose and objectives. The MCMOD is established as an overlay district to allow multifamily as of right in accordance with section 3A of the zoning map, MGL, chapter 40A, in a manner that balances the need for compliance with state mandated housing densities within the proximity of the county VA and rail station, while preserving the city's character of the city's neighborhood. 8.83, applicability. An applicant may develop multifamily housing on parcels within the MCMOD in accordance with the dimensional provisions of section 8.8. The MCMOD is an overlay district superimposed on the underlying zoning districts. The regulation of use, dimensions, and all other provisions of the zoning ordinance with respect to the underlying zoning districts shall remain in full force except for multifamily dwelling uses allowed as of right in the shall remain in full force except in the MCMOD. All other uses in the underlying district that are not identified in section 8.8 shall continue to be permitted and are governed by the requirements of the underlying zoning district. 8.84. General dimensional requirements. Notwithstanding any other provisions of the zoning ordinance, to the contrary, any multifamily housing development by right within the MCMOD shall only be subject to dimensional criteria of the MCMOD as set forth in subsection 8.41 through 8.48. 8.41, maximum number of units per building. There shall be no more than 4 dwelling units in a single multifamily building in the MCMOD. Minimum lot area. The minimum lot area use shall be 6,000 square feet. 8.843, maximum building height. The maximum building height for a multi-family dwelling shall be 48 feet. The maximum number of stories shall be 4 stories. For the purpose of this section, 8.8, no story shall be more than 12 feet high. Building height shall be calculated in accordance with section 2.326 of the zoning ordinance. 8.844, minimum lot frontage. The minimum lot frontage for a parcel in the MCMOD shall not be less than 50 feet. Minimum setbacks. The minimum front and side yard setbacks shall not be less than 10 feet. The rear yard setback shall not be less than 20 feet. 8.846, maximum lot coverage. The maximum lot coverage for a multifamily dwelling shall not exceed 40%. Parking areas, parking structures, and recreational structures, including but not limited to swimming pools, tennis courts, an accessory community clubhouse serving the multifamily development shall be excluded in the calculation of permitted lot coverage. 8.847, minimum distance between principal buildings. More than one multifamily dwelling may be located on a single lot, provided there is a minimum of 50 feet between buildings and other dimensional requirements of the section are met. 8.848. The MCMOD shall not have a minimum. The 8.848. The MCMOD shall not have a minimum or a maximum file requirement, an open space requirement, nor a maximum number of dwellings, maximum number of dwelling units per acre. 8.85, parking requirement. Not less than 2 spaces per dwelling unit shall be required in multi-family dwellings within the MCMOD. Private garages or multi-family dwellings shall comply with the minimum setback requirements of the MCMOD. Said parking of each dwelling unit shall be located on the subject lot. Not less than one bicycle storage space shall be provided for each multi-family dwelling unit in the MCMOD. 8.86, accessory structures. Accessory structures shall be permitted subject to the requirements of section 4.22 of the zoning ordinance. 8.87, affordable housing petition.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the petition, please come forward, state your name. Councilor Harris.
Thank you very much. I rise on my copy that I have on 8.86. 647. Minimum distance between principal buildings, more than one multifamily dwelling may be used in a single lot provided there is a minimum of X feet between the buildings. My copy does not read 50 feet. I'm trying to make sure that it wasn't 50 feet, and our copy is X.
I have 50 feet on my property.
I have 50 feet coming.
Copy I have.
Okay. Councilman Lee.
Thank you very much, President. So I am looking at what I have, the King Trust phone clerk as 50 feet. What came to us with this map as X feet, and what is on tonight's docket as 50 feet. So just to clarify.
Thank you, Councilor. So we're gonna, anyone wishing to speak in favor of the petition, please step forward. And that, hold on one sec. There is anybody that would like to speak, feel free to line up out in the hallway. And then if you could sign clearly, already done. Anybody that comes in that hasn't signed in, if you could pass that back, and that way they can be doing that while you testify. Just print clearly on there your information. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Usually when I get a platform here, I'm complaining about something. Not tonight. Not tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Annette.
Annette, is that microphone on?
It says green.
That's great, thank you. Just pull that closer to you, that's great. Thank you.
I'm a real estate broker who lives in the city. Every month I run sales numbers for Waltham and a number of other communities, but we all know that there's not enough housing here in the city, which results in higher costs for both buyers and renters. The median price for a home in Waltham in June was $815,000. And a year ago, very strange, in 1 month, a number of big mansions that were built recently were sold, and the median price that month in Waltham was over $1 million for a house. And this was an anomaly, but I still found it rather shocking. Obviously, one way to moderate the cost of housing is to create more housing, and that's the objective of the MBTA Communities Act. It aims to do this by requiring communities to adjust their zoning codes to allow more multifamily homes to be built by right without having to go to the zoning board of appeals for approval. I looked over the proposed changes in the city zoning code. I also attended a meeting about the legislation presented by CHAPA, the Citizens Housing and Planning Association, to know more about the details. My comments are short and sweet. First, please take advantage of the outside experts offered by the state to review the zoning ordinance changes. There is no charge to do so to the city, and this will assure that there will be no stumbling blocks in getting the plan approved. All you have to do is that. I also suggest increasing the maximum building height to allow a larger number of units per building. This will increase the potential number of total units within the overlay district. And just as importantly, there will be a greater probability of professional management of the larger buildings. We'll see fewer mom and pops decide they want to get into this business because it's a way to make money, and they have no idea what it's like to maintain even a full family. I would also suggest that you decrease the minimum parking requirements. Let's make an assumption about the overlay district. It surrounds the train station, because the assumption is that people will use public transportation and have a lesser dependence on private vehicles, obviating the need for multiple cars per unit. I've attended more than a few council meetings where developers come in and they present their plans for their 40B and other developments. And it's almost like there's a script. The first person who gets up and says, be a negative impact on our schools, too many children. And then the second person gets up and says, oh, the traffic's going to be horrible. Well, neither of these factors should be of major concern with the new zoning. According to CHAPA, the Citizens Housing and Planning Association, growth in the school-age population occurs with the increase of single-family homes, not apartment rentals. And one major objective of the community's multifamily overlay district is to increase housing density around transportation hubs, eliminate the need for multiple individual families. Can I tell you how delighted I am that the council is addressing the requirements of the MBTA Communities Act in a purposeful way? I would ask that the final amendments be modified a little bit here and a little bit there to maximize the impact of the changes. This will allow Waltham's housing prices to moderate, and just as important, allow workers to be able to live in the city where they work. Thank you for your attention.
Did you get a chance to sign in?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
And so that as well.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tom Benavides. I live at 308 River Street, number 3 here in Waltham, and I'm a member of Waltham Inclusive Neighborhoods, and I am a passionate supporter of new housing. For too long, Waltham has encouraged rapid job growth without building the housing to accommodate all new workers that are brought to the Waltham area. Waltham has presented tens of thousands of new workers with no choice but to either outbid existing residents for housing or to move far away for longer commutes. This is the pattern which has led to a rapidly rising cost of living crisis and a rapidly worsening traffic crisis. With that in mind, I am so incredibly happy to see that Waltham has at long last presented plans to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. I am particularly supportive of the fact that Waltham's plans in this overlay district choose to focus the vast majority of new housing in industrial and commercial areas where housing does not currently exist. Waltham will most effectively reduce rapidly rising housing costs and reduce rapidly rising traffic congestion if we actually allow for housing to be located near to where we create jobs. I am in full support of allowing housing to be built in the same places we allow for commercial and business development, in what we call mixed-use neighborhoods. So thank you greatly for this. However, I do have one small complaint. This is not relating to the zoning itself, because I think the zoning itself is delightful and a good thing and step in the right direction. But the issue is, if you intend to use this zoning to comply with the MBTA Communities Act, we will get sued at the end of the year if you take no other action, and we will be not in compliance. The reason for this is twofold. First, this plan requires some incredibly wasteful and little nonsensical parking requirements. It's not hard to go through census data to learn that the average household in Waltham only uses about 1.5 cars. Roughly half of Waltham households only have 0 or 1 car in their household. And we know from MAPC's Perfect Fit Parking Study, which studied the Metro Boston area, including developments in Waltham, that the average household in larger multifamily developments only utilize about 1 car per household. In spite of this, Waltham is currently mandating 2 vehicle parking spaces per household. And the big harm of this is that parking costs money to build. When we're wasting all of these, when we're building all these parking spots that are never going to be used, just permanently empty gravel and asphalt, that raises the cost of new housing by tens of thousands of dollars per unit, because it costs tens of thousands of dollars to build a parking spot. And that price goes up if it's like parking garages or underground parking. And then the second arm of these excessive parking minimums that don't really match with the current existing Waltham is that it also takes up space. Tons of empty and unnecessary asphalt is how urban heat islands happen. And it also just geometrically takes away space from desperately needed housing as well. So the current parking minimums are incredibly bad policy, and I highly encourage you to revise the parking minimums in this overlay district to actually match with Waltham's current needs and behaviors. And the second reason for non-compliance is much more straightforward. When you consider how much space this overlay district wastes on parking spots, and when you consider that it makes it illegal to build anything denser than 4-unit buildings 50 feet apart from one another, or now in undefined distance apart from each other, we learned that this overlay district, when the buildings are 50 feet apart, only have a model unit capacity for 2,225 units. 2,225 is far below the 3,982 units that is required for compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. And you will notice that the law department has recently changed the text of the overlay district, replacing 50 feet with a placeholder value X. So the question, of course, is what value does X need to be in order to reach this threshold? And the answer is 0 feet. Only if these 4-unit buildings are 0 feet apart will we meet the unit requirement in order to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. Which is to say, it is impossible to comply with the MBTA Communities Act with separate 4-unit buildings. We need to legalize a larger variety of buildings. We need to legalize apartments. And Waltham has a deadline to create this new zoning plan. The deadline is December 31st of this year. Time is running out quickly, and quite embarrassingly, Waltham has an incredibly understaffed planning department. That is not a knock against the people who currently work in Waltham. They're incredibly competent and put a lot of hard work into this. But foundationally, you can't execute a plan if you don't hire people to come up with a plan. So please expand and fully staff the planning department so that Waltham has employees who know how to create new zoning in the long term. Of course, the next budget year is until next May. We're not going to get funding for more planners for a long time. So in the short term, please apply for the free technical assistance made available by statewide organizations such as the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. Because they literally have free zoning consultants that will be provided to Waltham to comply with the MBTA Communities Act to create new zoning. All it requires is us asking them for those resources. So I know it's currently on the docket for later today for everyone here, the city councilors, to discuss hiring a zoning consultant. I know it was initially only put before city council in order to conduct an economic feasibility analysis, which would, permit affordable housing. But quite frankly, this thing needs to be started from ground zero. Make sure that the zoning consultants that you are hiring know that they're getting into it. Please make sure that you're actually developing new zoning that will not get us sued by the state for non-compliance. Over 90% of MBTA communities have applied for technical assistance. Waltham is very much an outlier for not wanting to reach out for help, even though it's free and readily available. So I highly encourage y'all to do so. Because the clock is ticking. But thank you so much, and thank you all for voting on the zoning amendment.
Charles?
Good evening. My name is Carlson Potter. I live at 74 South Street in Waltham. I'm speaking in favor of the city's proposed plan as was presented tonight, without all of the exceptions that I've heard so far, to implement the requirements of the state-mandated MBTA Communities Act. I do so even though to exclude anything close to affordable, inclusive housing in any form. Waltham gets no credit or consideration for any of the large apartment complexes built and currently being under construction. Waltham zoning has always provided for every type of housing. Waltham's current makeup is close to half apartments and single-family homes, far exceeding the ratio of any of our neighboring communities. Waltham residents have consistently opposed more density in the form of apartments, recognizing that we are overdeveloped and our present infrastructure cannot accommodate high-density housing in residential areas of our city. This proposed plan will protect our residential neighborhoods, allowing fourplexes that in all probability will be built as condominiums. You will hear housing advocates lobbying for more density in the form of apartments that will rent to a transient population reliant on public transportation to the detriment of Waltham families who rely on automobiles to carry out normal daily activities. I would ask city councilors, How often do you hear residents asking for the need for more apartments to be built, particularly in their neighborhoods? I urge you to vote to preserve what is left of our suburban community. This thoughtful plan does that while complying with the state mandate. Be mindful that this plan will not satisfy the most radical individuals in our community who would like nothing better than to see Waltham become more like Cambridge and Somerville. Waltham residents have consistently said, we want to remain Waltham. This plan builds neighborhoods and brings the community together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Colleen Brennan, and I live at 89 Bishop Forest Drive. My husband and I moved here because Waltham is well located and a diverse and interesting community with access to commuter rail and bus service. This was very important to us. We found a home of reasonable size that is actually in a multifamily housing community with over 300 units, where we all share the open space and parking. I mention this because that's what we're talking about here tonight. I speak as a strong supporter of the concept of the NBT Communities Act and of the proposal that the city has made. There are several things that I find very positive. One is that allows for housing development in areas that are now commercial and industrial. So no existing housing will need to be demolished, and no neighborhoods will become more crowded because of this plan. Also, 100% of the multifamily zones are within a half-mile radius of the Waverly and Brandeis commuter rail stations. This was not a requirement, but it does seem like a really positive feature because people can actually walk to either of these two stations targeted in the proposal. Other aspects of the proposal I find a little troubling and confusing. First, as has been mentioned earlier, I am not sure, and I'm not a zoning person, so I can't tell, but I am not sure that this proposal is going to lead to 3,982 multifamily units, as is required. And I think that needs to be determined before it's submitted. In addition, the type of housing that the city administration proposes seems to me limited in imagination. Maximum of 4 stories with 4 units per building on a 6,000 square foot lot with 2 parking spaces per unit. I fear that the wording of this proposal could easily lead to cookie-cutter buildings surrounded by asphalt. We think our city should do better than this. To that end, the state has made technical assistance available to cities and towns, as has been mentioned earlier. In fact, in the guidelines that were sent to the city, there is an entire section on technical assistance that is available. Specifically, the state's Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and the Massachusetts Housing Partnership have all offered free technical assistance to cities and towns. Has Waltham taken advantage of this? If I were a person voting on this proposal, I would want to know. Have we had zoning and housing development experts who also understand all of the nuances of this law look at our proposal before we submit it, close to the date of the deadline? And since Waltham does not have a permanent planning director or a fully staffed planning department, it seems that the mayor and the city's law department have written this proposal. I would be concerned about that. They are not experts in zoning and housing development. I know many of you have had a lot of experience, but this is a new situation that we are facing, and one that requires the input of experts. So I ask that you take these things into consideration when you make your vote and examine many of the details before you make your final decision. Thank you.
Hi, thank you to the City Council. My name is Danny Simuda. I am a resident at 14 Brook Ave, Unit 2. I want to begin by saying that I am in support of any plan that makes it easier to build more dense, transit-oriented multifamily housing. We have a regional housing crisis caused by a severe shortage of homes. I've known people who have stayed in bad relationships because otherwise they wouldn't be able to afford them. One of the biggest topics of conversation for people my age is whether it's even worth it to try and stay here anymore. It's so important that we stop the ever-coming housing crisis. For that reason, I want to praise what this plan does right. The overlay proposed for what's currently industrial and commercial areas, as others have said, meaning that new housing will not come at the cost of existing housing. And again, as others have said, 100% of this new zoning is within a half mile of commuter rail stations, far above the required 50%, and making sure new households have access to transit means we can grow as a city without adding more cars onto our roads, contributing to traffic and pollution. However, I do think our plan falls short. First, 2 parking spaces per unit is far too many. About half of current households in Waltham have either 1 or 0 cars. Current apartment complexes in Waltham are vastly overparked. When we require too much parking, it means that we pave over lots with asphalt at the cost of trees, yards, and more housing space. When the law department presented this plan ordinance rules initially, they said that they expected the rules to result in developments that look like 4 2,400 square foot units on a 6,000 square foot lot. But it's not physically possible to build the maximum lot coverage on the minimum lot size allowed while fitting an 8-unit surface parking lot. I honestly tried for a while, and I wasn't able to do it without squeezing the building down to a 1,000 square foot footprint. I also think that we're missing some opportunities with our plan as it exists. We have some parcels that are large and ripe for redevelopment, like the selected office park just off the Brandeis Roberts commuter rail stop. We could zone for mixed use and mid-rise apartments there and help make a desirable place to live right by a commuter rail stop while helping absorb the growing demand to live in a place as great as Waltham is. I think we shouldn't just meet our technical obligations, but go above and beyond, like our neighbors in Lexington and Watertown. Lexington approved their plan last summer and the sky isn't falling. Instead, they will have more apartments and condos for people to rent or buy in their town without needing $1.5 million for a single family home. Across the country, we've seen cities like Austin and Minneapolis allow more housing to be built, and when that housing gets built, rents fall and everyday people are better off with more money in their pocket. I implore the City Council to take what is good about this plan and make it better with fewer parking minimums and greater density so we can imagine a dynamic, welcoming Waltham that has room for everyone who wants to be here without pushing any current resident who can no longer afford it out. Thank you for your time.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, my name is John Raycure. I live at 38 Maple Street, apartment A. I've been in that apartment for 17 years. It's got a fridge and a gas stove that was installed in 1980. And the stove has 3 power lights that are always running. It makes for a very hot kitchen. And it's a first floor apartment. It's very noisy, it's on a busy street. And I'd love to move someplace nicer, but I don't think it's right. So I'm here to ask for you to improve the MBTA exact plan that we have by allowing even denser multi-family units, apartment buildings to be built, and more affordable housing. Parking is nice, but what we really need is more affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Jennifer Santiago. I live at 36 River Street. I live here, but I also work here. I run 2 hotels here in Waltham. So my point of view and reason for supporting this is really from the standpoint of employees. I've got two managers that live as far as 30 and 40 minutes away. One manager that lives in Orange. I didn't know where Orange, Massachusetts was until I started running these hotels here in Waltham. Because they used to live here and now they can't afford to live here. So I moved here and I paid $3,200 for a one-bedroom apartment. We seem to have a lot of really expensive apartments here. And then I have housekeeping staff that live, a lot of folks in one and two, family apartments. We seem to be missing a middle level of apartments and family dwellings. But I do understand the fear. I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, where it's dense. So I get that. I completely understand that. So I understand how this bill was put together, and I do support it. I think your apartment buildings might be kind of holding it back a little bit, but I do support it nonetheless, because I guess we have to start somewhere. But I do say this, supply and demand, we have some demand, and it's forcing a lot of folks to, especially in the business community and the folks that are running businesses, to not be able to find staff. We have a hard time finding employees that want to drive all the way here, because we don't pay as much as we do in the city to have to come all the way over here. I hire folks, and it's not worth the traffic to come all the way over here. And it certainly is not worth living here if you don't make land to live here. So just, food for thought. I love Waltham. I worked here 15, 18 years ago for the same family business, the Gilberts, amazing family, fourth generation hotel owners, and I worked for them again. Waltham is phenomenal. I love this place. It could not be better. But I will say this also. I walk into supermarkets that are half empty. I think we could use development. I think we could use a little kit of building here. There's no doubt about it. But I do understand the fear of overdevelopment and kind of going too high. Again, I grew up in Lowell, and I raised my kids in Chelmsford because of it, so I get it. So that's my 2 cents of reality. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
My name is Rachel, and I live at 50 Adams Street, apartment 3. I am a renter. I lived here like 6 or 7 years, so I wouldn't consider myself a
Rachel, hold on one second. Pull that mic a little closer to you.
Of course, is that better?
That's not good. Thank you.
As I was saying, I've lived here about 6 or 7 years, so I wouldn't consider myself trans. I'm really lucky that I've been able to grow roots here and a thriving community through my volunteer efforts. I've been able to work with Waltham Mutual Aid, with Healthy Waltham, with the Day Center. And so I'm acutely aware, as like one of the members who helps people in mutual aid, how many people are suffering. I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried to fill out a RAP form or a form for LIHEAP, but I'm college educated and it is hard. And I'm not even panicking when I'm doing it. I'm just trying to help somebody do it. So many people are coming to our community, which always responds so quickly. No one who has asked for help has gone away without it, but they're coming to our community because they're making choices between paying rent and paying utilities, or their car payment, or their kid's dentist bill. And so I'm really glad that we are thinking about building more housing so that we can think about people's safety. And I just know that if we get that free technical help, we can change the plan to make sure that it really supports everyone in Waltham. And I think one of the weird and wonderful things about Waltham is that you can kind of pretend you live in a suburb. Like, depending on where you live, I have been walking around, and I love walking, so I've walked all over North Waltham and Hardy Pond and River Street and down by Purgatory Cove and love it. But you can pretend you are living in the Western Mass suburb that I grew up in. But I live in a city, so we need to build housing to support the city. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Welcome. And I did sign it, but thank you.
I'm Sean Diamond. I live at 3 Marlton Road. That is actually a part of the city that is within walking distance of the Waverly Station. It is outside of the half-mile radius. It is surrounded by single-family homes. It took me up until last year to finally get a driveway installed 4 years after not a driveway, sidewalks installed 4 years after I moved in, and I'm on a corner lot. I've only gotten half of that. So only one side of the corner lot has sidewalks at this point. And I guess I found it curious that despite all of the zoning, it didn't seem to have any provisions about accessibility or sidewalks or walkability. I did note and I appreciated that there was a minimum requirement for bicycle spaces, but I think as somebody else pointed out, it seems very unusual given the nature of what we appear to be trying to do, both in compliance and spirit with the act. To have a minimum parking requirement of 2 per unit. So if you are going to have that 4-story, potentially 4-unit setup, and you're going to go up to that 48 feet, and you're going to try to meet all those setbacks, it really just doesn't seem practical or physically possible to have parking spaces, even if you do cover the whole thing in pavement. So I was curious as to, or would, I guess, respectfully request that you consider waiving that requirement altogether, or at the very least making it 1 parking spot rather than 2. If you find those 2 parking spots absolutely non-negotiable, I would suggest an exception to that 48-foot, 4-story height. Say that 48-foot and 4-story starts the level above ground level parking to allow for a parking garage underneath 4 stories, and that could at least save some square footage on the actual property and lot size, with still getting the parking requirements and still allowing for 4 units. Beyond that, as other folks have commented, Waltham is a unique city. It does have a historic district that is, well built up, well urbanized, and right next to a train station. We're within very close walking distance to the train station today. And I wanted to acknowledge that also in the northern part of Waltham, although outside of that, primarily outside of the half-mile radius of Waverly Square, there is quite a lot of parking space and other things that are reasonably within walking distance. Again, if you could actually physically get to it. If you go to one of the parks that is actually within that space, Beaver Brook Reservation, and you try to walk over to Mighty Squirrel Brewery, which I've done on a number of occasions, you will find a curb cut to nowhere that you can't, you get on a curb cut and then it's just grass for the rest of the way. And I believe that is, one of the spaces that might be physically within this half-mile radius. It is something worth noting that if we're going to be putting obligations in there, let's make sure that you can actually walk to the commuter rail and you're not just putting a house in. So again, I don't know how that fits into zoning or not. I'm not a zoning expert, but I did just want to emphasize those points. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Welcome. My name is Jacqueline Norton. I live at 33 Gorham Street, apartment 8. And thank you to the counselors and members of the board for having us this evening for this public hearing. I'm a resident who lives exactly half mile from the Waltham commuter rail station. And I would like to first state about a building that is currently built on ground that would not be able to be built by right. The building I currently live in is 5 units with less than 2 parking spaces per unit. Based off of the city's existing plan, current existing buildings do not meet these requirements. while I am supportive of this proposal in its ideas and an effort for the city to comply with the state regulations on the MBTA Communities Act, I do urge the council and the board to adopt amendments that would increase the unit capacity or remove it to allow for more units within this area that can support the density with the commuter rail stations as well as bus service near the Waltham station. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Mitchell DeCanny. I'm at 372 River Street, number 3. Forgive me, I am new in town, but being in Waltham the last few months has been a very eye-opening experience, even for somebody who is a New England native. I like to say a New Englander for life, but strictly speaking, that's not true, having lived in California for a couple of years. While there, I did find that one thing made it very difficult, and that was the cost of housing. In Waltham, I was surprised to find that despite being in New England, where I grew up and spent almost my entire life, it now faces the very same problem that makes life very difficult for folks on the opposite side of the country. I do want to say thank you for considering the proposal that's at hand here, and thank you for taking the MBTA Communities Act very, very seriously, because it is very serious for the majority of people that live in Waltham and Massachusetts in general. The proposal, as written, has a lot of good stuff in it. It has good bones. And really what that comes down to is density. It's going to increase the density that we can build here in Waltham, which is a step in the right direction, as has been discussed. I'm deeply in favor of this. However, I want to encourage everybody who's listening here tonight to one perspective or another, people who've lived in Waltham for just a short time and people who have been here for every day of their lives, to consider increasing the amount of density that the proposal provides by eliminating the limit on how many units can be built on each lot. Furthermore, as discussed at length already, I won't belabor it, the strict parking requirement that is currently written into the plan probably needs to be done away with. In particular, there's 2 spaces that are required for each new unit of housing, if I understand correctly. I would suggest that perhaps this limitation, as it is, be eliminated completely. It should be those that are building the housing that should decide how much of that space and land can be used for parking. Another piece of that proposal that has not been discussed is a very short portion that discusses bicycle parking. There's actually a requirement written in there that would require a bicycle parking space to be built per unit, if I understand correctly. We can get more creative than that and more specific. I would like for this to be considered more deeply and this bicycle parking to be required to be built off-street. What form that takes, though, can be just about anything. Some buildings, you could ask for an indoor bicycle room, something very safe and secure for people who might have expensive electric bikes that use to commute, whether that's in Waltham or to a community next door like Lexington or Watertown. At the same time, smaller builds might not need to accommodate such a thing. They can instead have an outdoor rack covered, but in the rear of the building, so property is not vulnerable to theft, for example. Furthermore, there isn't any mention in the current proposal of the MCMOD to make any use of this land for mixed uses. That might be something to consider if it's legal under the MBTA Communities Act, because a mixed-use neighborhood can provide a little bit more vibrance to a block. There is also the land that's outlined in the zoning map as well. While this land is what's required to be built, it could be expanded if there is any space to do so. The last thing that I'd like to implore you to do is to take advantage of free state help. They say in economics there's no such thing as a free lunch. This is your invitation to chow down. There's a golden opportunity here to really have a new vision for Waltham, a town that can grow for everybody, and a city that works for more people. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the petition? Seeing none. Would anyone like to stand and be recorded in favor of the petition? If you believe this is a good idea, or if you are in favor of the petition, please stand up at this time, and we're going to count you, so remain standing.
If you've already spoken as well?
Yes. The question was, if you spoke, you have to stand. The answer is yes. Stand up if you support it. Good to see you. Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the petition, please come forward, state your name and residential address for the record, and sign a block. So, welcome. Did you get a chance to sign that block?
I will remember that.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emma Howard. I live at 214 School Street.
Just step closer to that mic so you can hear.
My name is Emma Howard. I live at 214 School Street. I have lived here now for a number of years, and I've lived in a couple of different areas of Waltham. I first lived over by the Charles St. Garden Apartments in a rented single-family home, and it should have been nice, and there was many very nice aspects of that. I did like having a backyard, but I recently moved to School Street, to a much more built-up area that I did not think I would like, and have found that I have actually really enjoyed. I'm disabled, and there are times in which I'm not able to drive. When I do so, because especially in my old place that was so far from anything else, I was more or less locked to where I live. Now living in School Street, where I'm able to walk to get to different places, where I'm able to access public transit in a much more active way than I did before, I found that my life doesn't shrink down every time my symptoms flare up. We've heard a lot of the same talking points, and I do agree with many of them, but I want to bring the City Council's thoughts to a different perspective on this, which is that I'm not the only disabled person who is not able to drive when our symptoms flare up, and for whom higher density and specifically mixed-use neighborhoods are a lifesaver in terms of being able to remain part of the community, no matter what we're going through at any given time. My roommate is being assessed for narcolepsy and very much hoping that they don't come back with that, because it means she can't drive and therefore means that she can't get to her job anymore. Beyond that, the largest disabled community, and one I know we have a lot of here, is the elderly. My parents are currently having a conversation about how safe my grandparents are to drive, and some of them start to have memory issues and not pay as much attention on the road. And it's a very difficult conversation, and I know it is for a lot of people. Not only because it brings up the concept of aging, but because it brings up the concept of reducing independence and isolation in much the same way that it does for me. Many elder people spend time in their apartments or their houses waiting for their children to come pick them up so they can come live their lives while they still have it. Allowing for higher density, allowing for mixed-use neighborhoods, not singular apartments or buildings, but neighborhoods of this, make sure that when people stop being able to drive, they're still able to be part of the community. I know that Waltham cares a ton about retaining being Waltham and not just a suburb of Boston, about maintaining the people who have lived here all of their lives. Higher density and mixed-use areas allow the people to continue to be here, allow the community to continue to exist, even though it might not look the same as the buildings being the same. I know that there's also a concern that density comes with an ugliness, because it often does. I would encourage the City Council to remember that it doesn't have to. A lot of the ugliness that we associate with density comes from trying to make high-density houses work the same way that single-family homes work. It comes from the parking requirements. It comes from trying to keep everything small while making it large. Density doesn't reduce the ability to have single-family homes.
It just gives options, and if we allow those options to exist as they are, with lower parking requirements, with increased units, and with increased height requirements, if we allow for the variety that Waltham needs, it means that every resident would have the options available to meet their lifestyle and abilities. I really strongly encourage the city council and the planning department to allow for higher density, less parking, and larger height requirements, to allow for people to continue living their lives in the city as they have for however long they've been here, and for however long they wish to stay. Thank you.
Just remember to sign that law. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi. My name is LaDonna Jackson. I live at 81 Briarwood Road in Waltham, and I'm completely opposed to this. First of all, I feel like there's enough housing in Waltham. Secondly, I have a 13-year-old son. He's gone to school in Waltham, started at St. Jude, he went to Our Lady's. For a year, he went to Kennedy Middle School. He has known since kindergarten many of the students that he went to school with. Because of the benefit of Waltham being a small community. When you start having these increased density neighborhoods, first of all, children don't have the ability to grow up in what would be called a small community. Waltham has been a small community, even though it is a city. Secondly, I'm a nurse. When you start bringing in an increase in population, you have to think about, okay, where are these people going to be taken to if they get sick? Waltham does not have a hospital. The closest hospital is Newton Wellesley Hospital. Thirdly, many of the people who have spoken out live in apartments. I don't think any of them have children. If they did, they would not be supporting a higher density model, because first of all, Kennedy Middle School, as an example, the number of students that go there are about 560. With 560 students, and then if you increase the population, each of those apartments, they'll probably have 2.5 children that'll go along with that. Where are those kids going to go to school? So now the population in the school goes from 560 to 1,000. So, thirdly, there's multiple cities, 13 to be exact, that are opposed and that are suing to not have to go along with the MBTA plan. And if those towns are suing, why does Waltham have to go along with that? And why do we have to be made to be the town that, okay, we're gonna just put it in Waltham. Belmont's not doing that. Arlington's not doing that. Waltham needs to maintain the type of city that it currently is, which it has many neighborhoods that are single-family homes. There are plenty of apartments for people that want to live in apartment-style living. I just the other day went to the Chateau to pick up food for my kids and myself, and there's a monstrosity being built behind the Chateau. So when people say that we need more apartments, we don't need more apartments. Waltham doesn't need to look like Cambridge, like Somerville. I actually work in Somerville, at a hospital in Somerville. If I wanted to live in Somerville, I would live in Somerville.
Thank you.
So I hope that every single person on this city council says, no, we're not going to do this. We need to think about the kids that live here. We need to think about the families that have already purchased homes that live here. the people that are paying exorbitant amount of taxes to live in Waltham because we want to, and we want to own a home in Waltham. We should not be forced to be turned into Somerville or Cambridge. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bill Morton, Bill is with the police center. I just ask, as people are speaking, let them finish their thoughts. I'm allowed applause at the end, but just, let's not interrupt them. Thank you. Good.
My name is Bill Morton, and I reside at 81 Briarwood Road. That was my wife, Ladonna, who just spoke. And I don't want to rehash anything that she said, but I want to say that I'm a proud member of the city of Waltham and resident, and that I applaud the city council. You guys have done really great work here, and I would vote to move forward with the very generous plan that I think you put together. Some of us even question why we're being forced to do this, but I can tell you that my family has lived here for generations. I'm proud to be from Waltham, and I happen to live on the Belmont, and I've seen the way that traffic patterns work in Waltham. Everyone knows the tricks out of avoid Main Street, like in school, and all that stuff. And I just know that if we are to move forward with a plan, with an increase on numbers that you guys feel comfortable with, I think it's going to have a very negative impact on transportation. And I look at my neighbors in Belmont. How, they have a major T-stop there. How are they going to build the kind of housing that is required for this and have it not impact their traffic, which borders our traffic? I mean, I just think that, we should just go and support the board for their good work. They've done a great job with the public spaces in this city. We're the envy of all of our neighbors. Every time I'm out at one of these parks walking my dog, I'm meeting people from Arlington, Lincoln, Weston, as well as people from Waltham. So I think it's high time to trust our board and our city council and move forward with what they deem is appropriate. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thanks for speaking into this. Eamon Dawes, 16A Gorham Street. I'm speaking today as a supporter of the MBTA Communities Act, but opposed to the current plan. I appreciate the time and effort the city put in to this proposal. However, I believe the inclusion of a high parking requirement is not in the city's best interest. As stated before, the current requirement is 2 parking spaces per housing unit. This is a requirement that is the current requirement even for multifamily housing today. As others have mentioned, half of households have no cars at all or just one. And if we look at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, they did a perfect fit parking analysis back in 2019, and they found that parking utilization for lots is about 75%. They looked at almost 200 multifamily housing units on 14 different municipalities, including Waltham, and they find that time and time again, cities and towns build too much parking. It doesn't matter if you have a small building, it doesn't matter if you have a big building, that 70% utilization is right where you have it. They've done some more studies in years past. If you look at the number of housing developments that have a 100% utilization, it's about a dozen of over 300 that they studied. And none have a parking requirement as high as the 2 spaces that Waltham requires. Just this past year, so they got post-COVID data in 2023. They were able to look at Watertown and Newton, and they found that even though the listed requirement and the delivered number of spaces was around 1.4, 1.5 spaces per unit, Watertown, the utilization rate was only 1 space per unit, 1.01 to be exact. In Newton, it was even lower, 0.88 spaces per unit. So this is a third, all the way up to 45% of parking going unused. And I believe we can lower, we can remove these requirements because excess parking has real consequences. Property that could be landscaped as common green space, public green space, is instead paved over. I know many of us don't like the look of new construction that goes up in our neighborhoods. Walls of garages, paved corner to corner. I know the mayor has been against sideways condos. That's often because property parcels are deeper than they are wide, and the entire building needs to turn. That's a requirement to be able to get enough cars in there, to get enough garage space and garage access. If we want to keep the lovely neighborhoods that we have in south of Waltham, around here on Main Street, where we already have apartments, we should be looking to requirements and zoning restrictions that match the current buildings we have built, not the new buildings that are going up that no one likes. The final result of their perfect fit parking study, the MAPC finds that the more parking you build, the more cars people will bring. They use the Field of Dreams quote, if you build it, they will come. So let's not build it. When you build housing that has excess parking, it just encourages people to bring excess cars and cause excess traffic. And we don't want more traffic in Waltham. So I support fully the MBTA Communities Act. I support our adoption of a zoning ordinance to satisfy those requirements. However, I think the amendment as written has far too much parking. I know just recently the Waltham Channel posted that there were over 600 applications to the Leland House, that affordable senior housing over on Newton Street. There were only 68 units. I know this body voted 2 or 3 years ago to reduce the total number of units on Leland House. And the largest complaint that you heard from neighbors and from people who wrote in was traffic. I don't want more traffic on Newton Street. There's so much parking, I don't want more traffic. And what we had to do is we had to cut housing for about a dozen or so seniors, a dozen affordable units, that there is 10 times the amount of need than there are actual units. And let's not let parking and the induced traffic that new development causes be a reason that anyone can have to go without housing again. Let's remove these parking requirements, let developers figure out how much of that amenity they want to give, and let's move forward with a solution to the MBTA Communities Act that has less of an impact on Waltham Street. Thank you.
Hi, Tim Riley. I live at 100 Howard Street. I've lived in Waltham for 12 years, and I've been a homeowner here for 8 years. Raising a family here, 2 kids who are going to Waltham schools next fall. I am opposed to the MBTA, the McNaught plan as it is written, but as a resident of multifamily housing, I'm actually generally happy to see upzoning in general. I think it's fine housing for families, for any type of people. And I think added supply is actually exactly what the market is calling for right now. Because quite frankly, we're stuck in a bad cycle of ever-growing shelter costs. Some might look at this and say, this is great, my investment is going to pay off, but for the rest of us, that actually just looks like more inflation. Like so many other people, I'm effectively stuck in my home with very low interest rate mortgage, which again sounds great, but because there's no supply, if I want to move anywhere or have to move anywhere, I'm looking at paying twice as much, at least in my mortgage, which is not a great situation to be in. I think that this growth in house prices actually poses a risk to Waltham's tax base and our balance of residential and commercial taxes. Shelter inflation has been identified as one of the largest current drivers of inflation right now, which means the Fed has been slow to lower interest rates, which for Waltham, since we're so dependent on a capital-intensive industry like biotech, which I happen to work in, this is actually threatening some of the stability of our businesses. While I obviously don't expect Waltham to shoulder the entire American economy and our interest rate issues, Waltham definitely has a role to play here, and we should contribute to increased supply. I do believe this plan has some good points. I do like that the mixed-use aspects of it are preserved. I thought it was a little bit unusual that there's overlay zoning instead of taking advantage of the MBTA's allowance for mixed use in the same structure, but maybe it's fine. I have strong feelings either way about that, but I think there's possible with simplicity there, opportunities for residential next use and commercial uses to be good. What I especially like about this is that this is net new housing in upzone commercial and industrial areas, and all the parcels are new transit. I think this is all great. However, the issues I have with it are that the parking minimums are too high. For a transit-oriented development, they could be reduced, I think, by quite a bit, especially in light of the actual utilization of parking within Waltham. If it's 1.6 all over Waltham, it's much less around transit, so we can reduce that. I think we can reduce it to 0 or even have parking maximums in this area. Besides the geometry needed for all of this parking, this impacts affordability because all of this unused parking is just adding to the cost of housing. The intensity of zoning that's proposed does not trigger our inclusionary zoning requirements, although I was kind of hoping that we would get an analysis of this, because inclusionary zoning, because I think it's set too high. It's going to block our development. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the petition? Seeing none. Would anyone like to stand and be recorded in opposition to the petition? So if you're in opposition, even if you spoke, you should stand. Anyone wishing to speak in a neutral capacity or seeking information, please come forward, state your name and residential address for the record and sign the law. Seeing none. I close that part of the public hearing and open the hearing to questions from council. Councilor Harris.
Thank you very much. I rise as chair of ordinances and rules and make a motion for Attorney Laughlin, Attorney Zadi to go to the podium and present the city's position and analysis of the MBTA community.
You heard such a motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
welcome Attorney Lochner, Attorney Zadi.
Good evening. I'm Attorney Lochner with the body, and we're just going to take a few minutes to do a presentation to help explain some of the rationale behind the plan that has been proposed this evening. As most of you are aware, the reason that we are considering the zoning is due to a state mandate which was passed by the state legislature. So the requirement for MBTA communities is that there be a zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides for at least one district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right, which means it cannot be subject to a special permit. Such multifamily housing has to be without age restriction and it has to be suitable for families with children. The term a district of reasonable size means that there has to be a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre. And there's a further requirement that these districts be located not more than a half mile from a commuter rail station, subway station, ferry terminal, bus station. So the reasonable size requirement is something that has sort of evolved over time as guidelines come out. In order to meet the reasonable size requirement for Waltham, which is a commuter rail community, you have to zone 50 acres at a minimum. We can meet that 50-acre requirement through more than one district location, but each district must be a minimum of 5 acres, and half of any of those districts have to be contiguous in size. Then there's a further mandate based on our annual census. We have to zone for at least 3,982 dwelling units. And while not 100% of that has to be within a half-mile commuter rail, there is a requirement that at least 50% is within a half-mile commuter rail for that total number of units. There is no minimum requirement or timeline for actual housing production. What is being required of communities is that they put in place the zoning that would enable this to be constructed over time. I wanted to give you a little sense of the timeline that has happened both on the state level and on the local level for the development of this zoning. So this law was first passed in January of 2021, and Attorney Azadi, who has many years of zoning and land use experience, first appeared before the Committee of the Whole in October of that year to discuss the requirements of the law. At that point, no community was really implementing the law because there was the need for guidelines for how this was going to be interpreted and applied. There's a lot of ambiguity in the statutory language that had to be fleshed out through guidelines. So the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, formerly EHCD, passed draft guidelines almost a year after that law was passed in December of 2021. There was a lot of community feedback for those draft guidelines. A lot of communities had concerns about whether or not those guidelines were workable. Not every community is exactly the same. Not every commuter rail station is exactly the same. So there was a lot of public comment. And in August of 2022, there was a substantial revision and then final guidelines that were passed with the second revision in 2023. So in January of 2023, the city complied with the first step of the MBTA by filing a required action plan. And then Attorney Azadi appeared before the Committee of the Whole to discuss that action plan in March of 2023. Again, Attorney Azadi appeared in June 2023, and in January of 2024, the Ordinance and Rules Committee received a communication from the mayor requesting that the matter be taken up in the process of zoning be commenced. Attorney Azadi again appeared before Ordinance and Rules to discuss what would be required for compliance in May of 2024. And then in June of 2024, myself, Attorney Azadi, and the mayor appeared before Ordinance and Rules to discuss the parameters of compliance over the district. At which point in time, we were directed, the law department was directed to draft and submit a version to council for review. have attended multiple seminars and training programs between January of 2022 and March of 2024 to understand the requirements of this. These programs have been prepared and presented by the Executive Office of Housing and Communities, the Massachusetts Municipal Lawyers Association, and CHAPA. We have been in close contact with the individuals at EOHLC who are determining compliance for municipalities. We've had 5 separate official meetings with EOHLC personnel between 2023 and the present, in addition to numerous other communications through phone calls and whatnot. And in the process of doing all of that, we have conducted reviews, or primarily Attorney Azadi has conducted reviews of the following, including the traffic level of service in the downtown area to determine compatibility for an overlay district there, bus routes, city and water infrastructure capacity, eligibility of Brandeis properties for inclusion in the district, and certain exclusions of land in the riverfront area adjacent to Charles. So with all of that as a backdrop, the plan that was before you this evening proposes an addition of 2 new overlay districts to the city zoning map. All right, you'll see that there's one right over here. This is the Waverly district, and there's the blow up of it right here. And then we have one down here in this area. This is the Robert Brandeis, and there's the blow up in that corner right there. So Robert Brandeis, the proposal is for a 55.22 acre overlay. And in the Waverly section, it's a almost 25 acre overlay. Both overlays will allow for as-of-right multi-family housing with specific dimensional restrictions. Now, again, we cannot make this subject to special permit, so this is not coming before any board of commissions for review. So we have to build in our dimensional requirements into the zoning. So in each of these districts, the underlying zoning remains in place, with the addition of this as-of-right zoning for multifamily uses subject to the dimensional restrictions that are listed on the slide. So what we have proposed is that these overlays would allow as a maximum 4-unit dwelling or 4plexes, with multiple 4-unit buildings being allowed per lot. So if you have a large industrial lot, we have a series of smaller buildings on that lot. 50-foot lot frontage, front and side yard setbacks not less than 10 feet, rear yard setback not less than 20. Maximum lot coverage would be 40%. We are not imposing a floor area ratio requirement or an open space requirement or a maximum number of dwelling units per acre. The smallest lot that would be eligible for a development of this size would be 6,000 square feet. And we have required not less than 2 parking spaces and not less than 1 bicycle storage for each unit. To give you just a general sense of where those numbers came from, what we look to do is basically mirror what exists in the zoning ordinance currently for other multi-family zoning districts. So these setback requirements, side yard and rear yard setback requirements, parking spaces, frontage requirements, those are the same requirements that you're going to see for other multifamily dwellings in the city. And we're trying to make this zone mirror that as much as possible so that it becomes a similar type impact as you have in other multifamily districts. The major difference is that we go up in height slightly to 48 feet, whereas most our multifamily districts are 4 or less than that. So it's slightly higher. And what it really is going to do is create these transitional zones between single-family districts and some of the more developed districts, like, for example, you've got your Brandeis campus and your Bentley campuses and other commercial and industrial areas. So this will sort of provide a transitional zone. To look at these a little bit more in detail, here is the half-mile radius from the Waverly Station shown on this map. Now, I have my next slide will show you better, but you can see outlined in red here. These are the parcels that we're proposing to include in this Waverly overlay district. Most of these parcels are currently developed with commercial industrial uses. And even though you'll see some of these extend a little bit outside of the half-mile radius, the state still considers them to be within half-mile because at least some portion of the parcel is within that half-mile radius. So there you see a little bit more clearly what this Waverly overlay would look like. You can see it comes along Waverly Road, and then it has some of the industrial parcels that are along Clematis. So the Brandeis Roberts overlay, this is the area along South Street, Sawyer Road, and Charles River Road. And the parcels that are proposed for inclusion in this are the Charles Bank housing development and adjacent condominium buildings, a couple of parcels that are currently owned by Brandeis, and some existing commercial and industrial parcels. And all of these parcels you'll see here are within that half-mile radius of the commuter rail. And here's just a little bit clearer look where you can see the streets and the buildings that are currently existing on those lots. So these next couple of slides are just an overview of some of the planning considerations that went into this proposal. As I mentioned earlier, we were looking at a transitional zone that would protect existing residential neighborhoods and limit really large-scale buildings directly adjacent to single-family areas. So this also creates a buffer between smaller residential areas and our larger institutions like Brandeis and Bentley. And the zoning of multiple large parcels, which are in excess of that 50-acre minimum, allows us to bring the density down. So we're not putting super tall buildings on really small lots. Instead, we've zoned really large lots and are encouraging a lower density. And the idea behind that lower density was also that your building type and scale might encourage more sort of townhome family style buildings. As I mentioned, the dimensional requirements that are in this ordinance are consistent with the zoning ordinance and one of the city's prior master planning follows most of the existing dimensional requirements for multifamily use, and really limits the scale for height and the number of units per building, with that being the fourplexes. It retains the underlying zoning, so if any commercial use or industrial use that is currently on those lots can continue. They won't become non-conforming in any sense. So as long as they are there, they can remain. New commercial or industrial uses can come in, or the use can transition to housing. Additional planning considerations were the traffic considerations. So by choosing these overlay districts adjacent to Roberts and Waverly, we were looking not to exacerbate traffic in the downtown core. So the Waverly traffic is really sort of flowing toward 360 and Route 2, with Brandeis and Roberts flowing more towards 195 and Mass Pike. There are a number of amenities that are close to these areas that would be beneficial to housing developments. So recreational areas in the Waverly area, we have the Cornelian Warren Park, Beaverbrook Reservation, and Howellville, formerly Fernald. And at the Brandeis Roberts, we have the Bobby Connors Playground, Hickory Park, and Cedarwood Playground. So even if these parcels were fairly densely developed, without a lot of open recreational space on these lots, they are in very close proximity to a number of other recreational spaces that would support the residents' use there. These two overlay districts are also close to grocery and other food amenities. We really having a Star Market and other small businesses in the Belmont area. Brandeis and Roberts having lots of walking to Hannaford, Market Basket, as well as businesses walking in South Streets. Schools, Waverly would be zoned for Fitzgerald and Roberts is zoned for Stanley, so you're not putting your entire district into the same elementary school districts. Both areas are proximate to the middle schools and essentially located in Waltham High School. We have spoken with engineering with respect to the infrastructure capacities in these two zoning districts. Water and sewer facilities in both areas are expected to be able to handle the increased demand even with a full build-out. Although, given the existing uses on these lots, it's unlikely that, we're looking at a full build-out on day one. This is a gradual overtime development, which would give the city time to improve infrastructure where needed. Affordability. So the city intends to impose maximum affordability requirements allowed by the state, and we're currently in the process of pursuing economic feasibility analysis that would allow us to impose the highest level of affordability requirement on these units. Right now, the state allows at least 10%, so we could start there and maybe even be able to go higher. And then a gradual build-out of existing development, as I mentioned, would encourage this gradual build-out and allow us to plan for infrastructure improvements. So does this plan comply with the state requirements? As mentioned at the beginning, there was a 50-acre minimum requirement. The two districts we're proposing have 80.16 acres total, which is well in excess of the state minimum. Any district has to have at least 5-acre minimum. Both our districts are well in excess of that. Half of the land in the district must be contiguous. We have entirely contiguous land. And then with respect to the density calculation, basically the state is looking at, I'm going to say that the calculations are complex in this. There's a complex model that we've been working with the state on this, but on the most simple level that we can sort of put forth before you tonight, they're looking at the number of units per minimum allowed lot area, and then multiplying that by the total usable land area in the district. There are certain exclusions that they apply, and that gets you to your gross density. So we're looking, we took our smallest lot that would be eligible, which is 6,000 square feet, and we figured that we can do zoning capacity for 8 units of housing. Our estimate is 72 of the 80.16 acres we have, approximately 72 are usable acres. We have to extract wetlands and things like that, which by our estimate puts us at 4,043 units of housing, which is a 56 unit per acre gross density, which exceeds the state mandate of 15 units per acre. And again, their mandated density for Waltham is 3,982, and we're looking at 4,043. So again, above the requirements. And then one thing that we have done, which not all communities have the luxury of doing just because of the way their land is laid out, we have been able to zone 100% of those units within the half mile of the commuter rail. Whereas only half of that would be required within the half mile, we're at 100%. So the next steps for the city, we have, as I mentioned earlier, been collaborating and working closely with the state. We have received favorable response from OHLC on our preliminary plans. We have submitted our formal pre-adoption approval. This is a process that EOHLC has communities go through before they do the final passing of the zoning, just to make sure that it meets their compliance models. We submitted on July 26th and have been in contact with them. They're reviewing it. We expect to have more input in the coming weeks. But again, it's been a collaborative process, and they've sort of been with us every step of the way in our proposals and our running of the models. The zoning has to be adopted by December 31st, 2024 to comply. And unlike other zoning, this requires only a majority vote of the council to pass. So we believe that we are currently on track to meet the compliance deadline for state approval. And I have to shout out to Attorney Gotti here, who is our compliance model guru and has run all of these numbers and crunched everything and spent really a lot of time becoming educated on this and bringing her zoning expertise to weigh on this. And this really reflects a lot of her hard work. So if you have any questions, I guess we'll stop right there.
Thank you, Attorney Locke. Councilor Harris.
Thank you very much. I rise at this.
Words.
At this point, we will open it up to the councilor questions and the board's questions, and the attorneys are here. What was really important, I thought, was to take a moment and step back. There's been a lot of discussion and information shared in various forums and various places. There's also been some criticism, rightful or not, of the analysis that the city has put in. And I am chair of ordinances and rules currently, and I can tell you the amount of work that's gone into this is multi-year, multi-pronged, working closely with the state. So what I thought was really important to bring before the board in the public hearing tonight are the facts. And that's really what's going to underpin this ordinance development that we do have to meet a timeline for. And I thought it was really important to get that information here into the public forum. So at this point, I turn it over to the group here for discussion.
Questions from councilors? Councilor Bradley.
Thank you so much. And this is for the attorneys. I too am in awe of the work and the calculations and the research that have gone into this. Quite frankly, reviewing this and now we're doing it again, it is almost head spinning. I think one of the things that I have trouble with is a lot of folks tonight have mentioned this and we've heard it over and over again. People are already living here in Waltham in housing that does not conform to existing zoning laws. And so the refrain during this presentation and what the framework that we've been working in to keep this within our existing zoning laws, I have trouble with that because a lot of the housing that people are living in right now does not conform to existing zoning laws. So we're not getting super creative in my opinion. I do have a question about infrastructure plans. Is there any sort of conceptual work being done to figure that out? Because just looking at where these parcels are, there isn't existing infrastructure like sidewalks, and if you go to any traffic commission meeting, you'll hear resident after resident say they're flat out scared to walk along Lexington Street, Trapello Road, and there's existing sidewalk infrastructure there now. So I'm just curious if there's been any thought or consideration into infrastructure.
Attorney Azadi.
Thank you. We have not done any infrastructure conceptualization at this point, as Attorney Lockman has already indicated. We have checked with our engineering department to make sure that our water and sewer infrastructure are capable of handling the increased number of units that would be put into place if this is built fully. And our city engineer has confirmed that that is able to be accomplished. With respect to infrastructure such as sidewalks, which one of the speakers mentioned tonight, there's been no specific discussion of that, but again, we get money every year for streets, and it would certainly be possible to add sidewalks to that type of construction as developments actually come to fruition.
Great, thank you. And through you, Mr. President, you mentioned in this process a number of agencies that you worked with and met with, which I think is great. I am just wondering, in all of these meetings and over the past year, maybe 2 years that you've been working on this, have you heard from any of these organizations or any of the other cities and towns that are doing this work right now? What is the role of their planning department been, their city planning department been in this process?
Those are not conversations that we've had concerning other municipalities. Our conversations have largely focused on our own plans and compliance.
And looking through the development limitations, if my math is right, we're talking about 8 units on a 6,000 acre lot, is that what's going to work? Excuse me, 6,000 square foot. Okay. So 8 units on a 6,000 square foot lot. And that calculation, I know you mentioned, is a derivative of sort of keeping within our existing zoning, but is there any way to increase the number of units on that lot, on that size lot?
So, 6,000 square feet is the minimum lot size, and so that's the one we took for making the calculation of what is the most we could get on that lot. So it was sort of our baseline. Do we even have a 6,000 square foot lot? The smallest lot we've zoned in here is 7,200 square feet, and most of them are much, much larger. So if anybody owns these lots and wants to develop, you know, this kind of communities of fourplex housing, they're going to be able to design that however they want to create it. With the zoning that we've created a maximum. That doesn't mean that, you know, there can't be some deviation in there as a developer and an architect work together to determine, you know, what's the best fit. And I guess this is a bit speculation, but through you, Mr. President, I mean, knowing what we know about what's been brought in before this council, let's say over the last, we'll just say 5 years, is there going to be an appetite for developers to develop this? Or is this going to be on the municipality ultimately? Like if we secure this land and, you know, are we thinking about any of those steps, I guess? So the law that was passed by the legislature requires municipalities to zone. There is no requirement for actual build out. We just have to zone to a certain capacity, which is why all these compliance models are looking at things sort of theoretically, not from a specific design perspective. So there's no obligation on the municipality to step in and build to that capacity or acquire that land. And there's no obligation on the people that own those lands to develop them for housing. The possibility has just been created for that to happen.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's another concern that I have, given that we had a proposal before a few months ago, and I know that the ordinance rules was working on this. That was a mixed use close to the MBTA station here in off Carter Street, and that didn't go through. So I feel like it's great that we're laying this groundwork for this zoning to be possible. I am not optimistic that it's going to work on my own. But I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Thank you, Council. Council Katz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also attended some of those webinars and I recognize the complexity of this law, so I want to thank you for the PowerPoint and breaking it down and simplifying it and showing some of these comparisons. So I represent Ward 70 where 55 of these acres sit. Mr. President, I don't recall that anyone who spoke, I don't believe anyone that spoke was in Ward 70. Could I ask you just to see if anyone from Ward 70 is attending tonight?
I don't have.
Yeah, are you able to just ask if anyone from Ward 17?
Is there anyone here from Ward 7? Some people are.
Okay, I just want to be
I
sure.
don't think I caught any addresses
Okay, thank you.
of the speakers.
Thank you. So I just have some chicken scratches here. I did want to point out, that several people spoke that the zoning doesn't impact existing housing, but it does because of 25 of those acres, 20 acres is the Charles Bank properties. And I'll get to that in just a second. So, yes, while about half of a little bit more than half in Ward 7 is currently commercial property, half of it is existing housing, which doesn't fall under the umbrella of affordable housing, but it is considered affordable by many of the residents that are living there. So some questions that are just a little bit all over the board here. Can a 40B, and these questions have come to me from some of my constituents, can a 40B still be built in this zoning? Would that negate the zoning that you're trying to move forward here?
A 40B could still be created under the zoning provisions of Chapter 48. That would not, however, negate this MBTA zone that we're proposing to create, because again, the state is requiring that we create a district that is capable of supporting the
Okay.
housing.
So with the MBTA overlay, we would be restricting height, for example. But with a 40B, we don't have that same restriction, correct?
With a 40B, they have the right to seek waiver of all dimensional requirements and in fact use requirements.
As has been asked tonight, is mixed use allowed? Would be mixed because where some of this is already zoned commercial and it could be built residential under the zoning, could it be both commercial and residential?
At this point, we haven't specifically addressed mixed use. We simply allowed the underlying zoning to continue to exist, but that's certainly something we can explore.
The Charles Bank property, which bear with me for one moment, which consists of Charles Bank Gardens, Charles Bank Estates, Edgewater Terrace, so there are 3 developments there on a little bit more than 20 acres, and that comprises 460 units today. Edgewater Terrace has 36 condos. Charles Bank Estates has 218 units, and Charles Bank Gardens has 206 units, so a total of 460, spread out on approximately 21 or so acres. Could you just give me an idea of how many units would be allowed on those properties within the provisions are getting too granular? Or if it's easier to answer.
You did do the math on this at
Okay.
one point. Just give us a second.
So that's a little less than half of that Ward 7 parcel. Sure. While the math is being done, over the past couple of years, I believe 2 of those parcels, the Charles Bank Gardens and the Charles Bank Estates, were put on the market for sale. I don't believe the sale has occurred. It's come on and gone on and off the market. I received many calls from residents of those properties concerned that a sale would change rents that they've been, some of those people have lived there for 30 or so years. So that will be a concern here from many of those residents that, again, as is reasonable that us rezoning could create a sale, which is going to knock those buildings down. So I just want to understand what we are gaining for housing here, potentially.
If we assume that the 21 acres is the correct figure for that development, then multiplying it by 56 units per acre would result in 1,176 potential units.
Thank you. The height that you have in the, I'm not going to go looking for it, but the height requirements that you have, does that include, because we see this all the time in special permits, does that include mechanicals that would be on the roof? Like, you know, the penthouses that aren't really penthouses, but the mechanical penthouses?
We did not address that. Yeah. In our experience, we're not generally on a fourplex like that going to have the same kind of mechanical infrastructure needs that you have on some large scale special permit projects that often need those kinds of accommodations.
Okay. And I've asked this before, but I just want to, I think it would be helpful for others to hear it. Can we stipulate in this zoning what types of, there are two parts to this, what types of energy is allowed? Like, I'm just going to say, it's just a for example, that we must require geothermal energy here, or we must restrict gas. I'm just giving you some examples. Can that be stipulated? And similarly, can architectural styles be stipulated in this zone? My understanding was, and I am not speaking this, but my understanding was that we can't create unfair zoning districts.
Yeah, I mean, the question about energy, I mean, possibly you could maybe put it in a preference or encouragement. It might be challenging to put in something that is, would be impossible to meet. So we have to be very careful when we look at a standard like that. With respect to architectural styles, this zoning is really just about the dimensional requirements. We're not looking at putting in some sort of site plan review process or oversight or design standards. And so that's a much more difficult thing to control unless you're willing to have that kind of an oversight process, which this does not contemplate.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one other thing with respect to the types of heating, for example. There are several pilot programs going on in the state looking at the possibility of having requirements, but that's still in the study process, and at this point, we wouldn't recommend doing that because we don't know if the state will decide to allow us to mandate it.
But none of that is part of this law.
No.
The part of the parcel also includes land that's currently owned by Brandeis. Is Brandeis allowed to develop housing? And if they were to use this, for example, well, I mean, it's complicated because they can basically do whatever they want today.
Yes.
But my understanding was that they, at a public meeting, they said that they may be abandoning that house.
That's correct. And one of the things we had discussions with the state about was the fact that there were two Brandeis parcels in the zone we're proposing, and one of them was identified as being permitted to be used, and the other one was not. And the state indicated that they would let us use both of them because the current use is not necessarily going to remain the use in the future. There's been some discussion possibly of transferring the property using it for other purposes. One of the lots already is identified as formerly Brandeis, now offices.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Vice President O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, attorneys. I'd like to first ask about the discrepancy on section 8.847. We have two sheets, one says X feet and 50 feet. Would you just speak to that and clarify exactly what we're looking for?
Yes, and I actually meant to cover that in my presentation, so thank you for the opportunity to The published version had an X there instead of the 50 feet. When we first proposed this at ordinance rules, as mentioned in the presentation, we were looking to track to the greatest extent possible the existing zoning requirements. And currently our zoning has a 50-foot requirement between when there's multiple buildings on a lot. So we had put that in initially as a way to sort of capture what was in the existing zoning. In further conversations with the state and through our modeling, it was determined that that was too large of a separation in order for us to meet the density requirements. So we have subsequently run those models with a 20-foot setback requirement, and that's what we're looking at right now as a replacement proposal for the 50 feet. It will have to be reduced from what was originally proposed in order to get the density that we require. But again, that is something we're just ironing the details out with the state as to what they will allow us to use as that requirement. But 20 feet is what is currently being looked at.
20 feet is good. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. You had also mentioned looking to incorporate max affordability. You mentioned 10% is a minimum, but you didn't mention what the maximum is. Is it 20%?
So we are in the process of hiring someone to do an economic feasibility analysis. Once we have the results of that analysis, working with the state, we will be able to make a determination as to whether or not our affordability requirement can exceed that 10% and what percentage it can exceed. But that's a process that has to go through analysis and approval with the state. So 10% is the current minimum. We're proposing to raise that as high as the state allows us based on that analysis.
So then I think that kind of answers my next question, which would have been, if there were only 4 or 8 units and there's a smaller lot, would that trigger an affordability unit be needed, or?
Yeah, not necessarily if we're only at 8 units and we haven't gotten up to 10 units. But like we mentioned earlier, there's no actual 6,000 square foot lot in these districts. 7,200 square feet is the smallest. Most are much larger, so if you're going to have many more buildings and many more units, so the likelihood that the affordability would be triggered by most of the lots in this development is very high.
And it's a piggyback from the Councilor Roger, who will like all this.
Sorry,
Please.
I just wanted to add one other point when you were talking about a maximum. The state has put out guidelines for the economic feasibility analysis also. And they've indicated that even with the economic feasibility analysis, the likelihood is that they will not allow more than 20% of the units to be affordable, unless it's a smart growth to zoning district under chapter 40R, in which case they would consider allowing it to up to 25% affordability. But it should have been adopted prior to.
Do I dare ask for a definition of a smart growth community?
It was a mix of
Okay. When calculating all the numbers, are you calculating for the roads that are being built into the piggyback from the Councilor Lodge, the infrastructure question? Is the city not tasked with calculating that? You're talking about these certain lots in the amount of houses you can fit in there, but you're going to have to build roads to access these lots. Does that take from any?
We would contemplate them being driveways rather than roadways. And the state's, the 40% gives us land around each of the buildings to be constructed. And that's why we've used a model where we took a 6,000 square foot lot with driveways that would access necessary parking.
And again, kind of you mentioned that you try to mirror the city's building codes and zoning codes as you build this. Things like the drainage pits, which were considered 10 feet off the houses. Is that something that was considered when with the lot sizes and the coverage? Yeah.
Sorry. that's not something that we've specifically addressed. But again, since we're talking about a building or multiple buildings with 40% lot coverage, we have land area that's available, and you're talking about things that would be below the ground level.
Okay. Fantastic. Those are my questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Councilor Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the attorneys, thank you for all the work you've put in. It's staggering. I had more comments than questions, specifically the affordability aspect of your presentation. I've been trying to keep up with the news of what other towns are doing. I've never seen that any other cities or towns do that. So that's a big pat on the back, I think, for everyone who ever thought of that. It was fantastic. We all know how expensive it is to live here. And the one sentence that always constituents of mine have brought up is while preserving the character of the city's neighborhoods. And I think this plan does that. The speakers tonight, thank you to them as well, certainly gave me a lot to think about, but I think this plan does that. In Waltham, you can live in a downtown area where you can walk everywhere, and you can live in a single-family neighborhood where you may not necessarily want to walk everywhere, and both of those options should be okay. And I think we've hit that. And you balance the requirement from the state, which was, some people have called it an unfunded mandate. We could go on all day about that opinion, but I think, I feel good as a representative of Ward 3 that single-family neighborhoods have been protected with this plan, so thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Fossey. Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the attorneys, a lot of what I wanted to say has already been said. But when you first, Attorney Azad, you came before us back in October 18th, 2021, when this was first presented to us. The MBTA Communities Act, as it was presented to us then, and it is now, the state does not, and the reason I say this, we had 13 people come in and speak from our community and all in favor. And the common theme that all 13 people mentioned was affordability. That by adding 3,982 units, we're going to add inventory to our city, which in hopes will make apartments affordable. I asked it in October of 2021, and I'll ask it again. The state, when they come into all these MBTA communities, do they specify affordability?
No, in fact, they specifically excluded it originally, and one of the revisions was to allow an affordability component.
So we as a community, the mayor, and both attorneys and everybody else that's been working behind the scenes, is looking to go to the state and put a mandate of a minimum of 10% within our community. But, correct?
The draft zoning that you have before you this evening, at the very end, it says affordability and it shows reserve. So, we're looking for guidance on, do we put in that 10% at the outset and then come back with the economic feasibility analysis, and if it allows us to go higher, then we go higher, or, do we wait and do it all at once?
Well,
But that's why it's reserved, we put it in there.
And that's kind of my comments, is the state is coming to all these communities that are on all forms of transit for the state and saying add housing. The residents are saying add affordable housing. The state is just saying add brick and mortar buildings for us to live in. What is preventing a developer from going in there, building these quadplexes and still charging $3,500 to $4,000 a month for rent? And I said it in October of 21, and I'll say it again today, the MBTA Communities Act is housing for Boston. It's not looking for the greater good of all of our residents here in Waltham, and how can we make it more affordable for people to live? Stay a half a mile within public transportation, build 4,000 units. We don't care how much you get for rent, because the people get on the train, they'll go into Boston, they'll go to work, and they'll come back. And I appreciate your efforts of at least putting that piece of affordability, because like I said, 13 people stood up here, and that's only a small percentage of people that say, and I see it on social media, that they can't afford to live here. But it's not just Waltham, it's Massachusetts, it's the Northeast, it's the United States, that we can't afford to live here anymore, and the state is putting these mandates. And I just wanted to emphasize and commend you on the fact that you're actually having that conversation to say, at least 10%, how high can we go? And at least give people a fighting chance. The other big hot button that I hear all over the state, and we've been hearing it, is fossil fuels stretch goals. Does the state mandate anything about fossil fuels, gas, oil, or any of the stretch codes? Does that apply to this, or is this just build it however you need to build it?
Any of the building codes or stretch codes that have been adopted in our community would be applicable to these developments.
But there isn't anything above and beyond where communities are eliminating fossil fuels, that the state is having communities build thousands of units, that there isn't anything that is dealing with climate change.
Nothing in the act that was passed by the legislature.
If I have no other questions, I appreciate your efforts, and I look forward to seeing the continued work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor LeBlanc.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. To you, to the attorneys. Thank you for all your work and diligence on this. And the councilor from Ward 1 brought up one of my thoughts, which was the affordability piece for the MBTA community deck.
I'm afraid we don't know.
I'm sorry?
I'm afraid we don't know. We've been focused on Waltham.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So Boston exempted themselves from this. So I would like to see what an affordability piece would look like this. And the council from Ward 3, stated, questions about unfunded mandates, and that's what we saw evening. Is the city of Waltham still under a consent decree from the EPA?
Are you talking EPA or DEP? We still have 41 for our sewer. DEP, yes.
Okay. So would these be, these new housing, if it was an 8-unit building, would they have to comply with the payments for the I&I for the
Yes.
infrastructure improvement?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. One other question I have is, this is a zoning change, correct? And how many votes does the zone change require?
Normally it's a 2/3 vote, but the quantum vote was changed for this, and it's only a majority to pass the affordable housing positions. So
What was changed on, I'm sorry?
for this, for multifamily housing, it only requires a majority vote to change the zoning. So all that's required to pass this is a majority vote of the council.
So that what?
8.
Supersedes local zoning?
Well, the majority vote, or the 2/3 vote, is part of the zoning act. So it doesn't supersede it, it just replaces it.
For all zone changes from now on, or just for this?
Just for the multifamily housing approvals.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Bennett.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you. Good evening, attorneys for our city. And if we were in the music world, I would consider you both rock stars. Because what you've done is incredible. That being said, several of the councils have asked a variety of questions. I'm just going to make a couple of comments, and then I have a couple of questions. I want to preface my comment by stating, I'm a Boston girl originally. I never knew what zoning was till I came to Waltham. And I never knew how sacrosanct the word zoning was that allowed a community like Waltham to deliberate on its own destiny. And what I'm seeing here is a complete decimation of what I know and what I've been involved in for all the years down here, it's a complete decimation of our zoning as we have used it over the years. And I say that because there are people who spoke here this evening who have reaped the benefit of the zone changes that have gone on through the years here, in which when I came here in 1970, there were 5 working farms. We have one, if that's what you want to call it. The 5 that were here are now residences of some sort. We had 5 manufacturing companies, including Raytheon, including Polaroid, and the other, Standard Thompson. Most of those now are gone. So the jobs that come with that kind of employment opportunities are gone, and they are residences. So we have continuously added to the residential component of our zoning and not necessarily provided job opportunities for perhaps someone who is not able to get into the tech industry or the health industry. But in the old days, it would have been someone who went to work for the Vincent's Farm, or who went to work to be the night custodian down at Raytheon, that the councilor to my right brought up, which is the aspect on the last page of your magnificent presentation, where it says, it requires only a majority vote to pass. That's the zoning. And you mentioned multifamily. Is it only the MBTA Communities Act multifamily, or is it all multifamily going forward?
It's all multifamily going forward. That was a change to 40A a couple years ago.
So, that being said, if we conceptualize what this city council has worked so diligently on for the last 10 to 12 years, and we look at the existence of the Merck, the Edison, the currents on the Charles, and now the 5th 40B that we are going to see in its completion pretty soon. If I added up all of the units that are in what I just mentioned, I think I'm probably looking at approximately 2,000 units. Was any thought given by the mandate from the state to us about how we have worked so diligently to try and create housing for a plethora of income people?
Actually, the fact that Waltham has always been receptive to creating housing has worked against us, because the statute requires that we follow the guidelines that have been established by EOHLC, and those guidelines classify each type of community. And Waltham has been classified as commuter rail, which means that we have to produce 15% of our current population.
And has any...
If we had a lower population to begin with, our number would have been lower.
But we're such an attractive community, people just keep wanting to come here. We are really in a catch-22. Now, and by the way, what is EOHLC, what's an acronym for?
Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities.
Livable communities?
Yes, it's the form of the HCD.
So we're basically being penalized for doing the right thing, voluntarily, and not with the mandate that we have done for the last 15 years. Now, my next question has to do with, if that is the requirement of the zone change, when the overlay, if we approve these 2 overlay districts, the underlying districts still remain the same, which in some cases is industrial and or commercial, so they're still there. Okay. And where the council time I asked about the vote of 8 for, which is the majority, not the supermajority, I remember when this municipal modernization bill of 287 line items was proposed in the MMA about, I'm going to give it 5 years ago, in the prior governor's reign. And the legislature adopted the municipal modernization bill. But in that bill, the option for voting in the legislative forum of the municipality, whether it be a city or a town, that option was given to opt in, and it was not a mandate. When did this become a mandate and part of the Mass General Law, that 8 votes and not the opt-in to go down to a majority? When did that happen?
I don't know the date off the top of my head. It's been within the last 5 years, though, that has changed. And it's really one of these preemption things where, you know, the state passes that, and that's what controls in terms of the voting majority. And I believe the policy behind it was to encourage more housing production, to allow zoning changes for multifamily housing to be passed with a lower quantum of vote.
There is not one person on this council who does not believe that we need more housing. Not one. The kinds of housing, I think we could have a very lengthy debate among 15 of us as to what kinds of housing. But we all agree we need housing. But we need housing for so many levels of our population. Those who were young when this all began 25 years ago are not young anymore, and many of them are looking to go into a smaller dwelling. But they can't afford a smaller dwelling because they don't have the earned income or the pension income to be able to afford a smaller dwelling. Many of our blue-collar workers, if you will, who are in blue-collar positions throughout the city, should be benefiting from this, but what the councilor from Ward 1 brought up very cogently is they will not be able to benefit from it because there is no affordability mandate in this mandate. What is it trying to do? That is my question. And why are we being mandated to do it, since we don't know what it's trying to do for our city? So I'm going to say to you, I am so grateful for your research. The senior counselor and the newest counselor. Together, you came up with a magnificent plan that I think benefits us at least as best it can. Now, I believe that the free market is going to dictate a lot of this. No mandate is going to make this happen. And the economic feasibility study, I think, is going to be crucial for us to see and hear about it. And in this, no one's even considered the migrant population that we have. And I'm using the word migrant and nothing more than that, because we have a huge migrant population in our city. And I know for a fact that there are, I know many of the people in that population. This is not going to benefit them. If anything, it's going to hamstring them. And how did the multifamily units that have been built over the years, the Bishop Forest, the Kingsway, the Casey Estates, Clark's Pond, I can go on, because I was here for all of that. So were you, Attorney Azadi. Every single bit of it. And I think there's one other counselor here who has been here for as long as we have, watching and working to make this better for the city. So as onerous as I feel this is, you have done, without a doubt, the best possible design for, I believe, for us that we could possibly ask for. So I thank you, and I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank
Thank you, Councilor. Second time around, Councilor LeBlanc.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just a question, as I was hearing the Council at Large from Chuck Pelleroy asking questions. In the zoning, as we're changing this, and this is residential to create housing, in the commercial and industrial districts, and I'll use Felton Street, where we have numerous body shops, welding shops, supply houses, landscapers, is there anything, so just like the rest of the economy, they're struggling to, maintain their space and pay their rent without moving out further west. No different in the residential and or the commercial. Is there anything protecting those, or are those just because they're commercial and industrial, will they stay with that zoning, or does this supersede it and turn them into residential?
The model that we've proposed only creates the overlay district in the Roberts and the Waverly area. We intentionally stayed away from the Felton Street area at this point in time.
So,
And so the underlying zone there, it's not underlying, it is the zone in that district. And with respect to the two overlay districts, anything that's in place and is allowed in an industrial or a commercial zone, depending upon which zone it's in, is still allowed to be constructed and used.
so if we take Clematis Ave, and it has a lot of commercial industrial down there, and I believe it falls within one of the zoning districts. Could that all be converted? There's hundreds of people that rent garage space down there, work electricians and plumbers and everyone else. Can that all be converted to residential units?
It could be if the property owner wishes to do so.
And then that would be multi-family housing, and would only require 8 votes of the city council?
Well, again, if the overlay district is in fact adopted, that will already be in place.
So there's nothing to protect any of them down there once this passes?
Again, it depends on what the property owner wishes to do. The property owner may wish to continue those commercial or industrial uses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Fossey, second time around.
Because I just had one quick question or comment. When the MBTA Communities Act first came out and it was presented, the city was doing their homework and they didn't reapproach the state. Do you recall what the state did to the city as far as a punishment for not communicating to them? And the reason I say this is 13 people in favor all talked about affordability of housing. So we didn't get back to the state. What did the state do to the city?
When, at the direction of mayor, we decided not to file an action plan at the original date, the state tried to pressure not only Waltham, but a number of cities and towns into complying with the mandate by attacking the budgets of the local housing authorities. And originally, they indicated that they were going to cut a portion of the housing authority budgets by 10%, and instead it appeared to be dramatically more. Therefore, we were involved in a series of meetings with housing authorities and the Undersecretary for Housing at the time to try and make them understand that the way the statute was designed, it was supposed to impact only cities. Housing authorities are independent agencies and should not have had any action taken against them based on what the city had decided to do.
I just wanted to get that out there on the record, because for the people at home watching and they're not here every Monday night, they may not hear all the nitty-gritty that goes on, and people are demanding affordability, and the first thing that the state did was attack affordable housing. So I just wanted to let everybody watching at home know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Second time around, Councilor Pinckney.
Me?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. President. I forgot the one thing that I made a note to bring up about the elephant in the room. And what is that elephant in the room? Well, all of this design that came out of the Municipal Modernization Act to do with transit-oriented development, to use a term, in the original zone that was bandied about, has to do with the central focus of the MBTA Transportation Hub. We're talking about $1 billion to $1 trillion organization that is at this point poorly run, unable to provide for their ridership, and we are being asked to create an event that is only going to exacerbate what they have now. And if every community does it, can you just imagine what's going to happen when all of these people surrounding the hubs of the MBTA central commuter stations? Can you just imagine all of these people who no longer want cars, who don't use their bikes, but they want public transportation, with an organization that's so much in debt and incapable of providing a service? That's what's going to happen. Who is thinking about the logic here? That's the elephant in the room.
Second time around, Council Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief. I just wanted to go back to the question about our initial proposal that was just asked. Through Mr. President, can I get clarification? Was a fine actually assessed to the city?
There was nothing assessed against the city. The housing authority, however, did have its budget reduced.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. President, is that back in order now that we've submitted our proposals?
I cannot say specifically that that is the case.
Okay, but we have not, we have not missed any of the deadlines.
Right.
And just thinking about the opportunity that we have here, as I listened to the folks that came and spoke tonight, I want to thank everybody for coming and speaking tonight. I think that it shows a certain sense of dedication to stay up this late, because we're obligated to stay up this late, quite frankly. And I appreciate all the comments, and I also want to reiterate appreciative of the attorney. I think we rallied against the state, we railed against all of this. The elephant in the room to me, voting members. Thank you.
Second time around, Council Hack.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be brief. Our friends in board serving the thing we're practicing. I do want to echo the comments of all of the public that came here tonight and spoke, and also all those that took the time to email. I did make sure to email them directly up to the clerk's office, and I did refer to distribute those emails. But I do thank all the analysis and all of the work that's gone into it. My question through you, Mr. Chairman, to our attorneys. We talked tonight about existing zones, industrial, apartment houses, or development, some houses. I mean, one of the things that needs to be looked at in terms of impact, right? We're trying to lessen that impact on some of these considerations, soften the blow, if you will, while still providing and giving new opportunity to create housing, and the kind of housing that builds neighborhoods and communities, not living in a big moving box. With that said, my question is to be thoughtful here. If a parcel is currently zoned commercial, industrial, recreational, overlay district, and the property owner either sells the property and or decides to convert that commercial use to residential use, what tax is collected? What tax is collected? Commercial today, and commercial tax. They get converted to residential, they move to residential tax level. Could you answer that in the next one, please?
Yes, if it's the underlying use of the property is residential, it would be taxed residential.
And that is a wholesale amount of commercial tax.
Yes.
That's my main question. Thank you very much. Nothing further.
Thank you. Third time around, Council Lawrence.
Thank you very much. I'll be real brief. Question, so the When the currents on the child, the MERC came on, this might go to rules and ordinance and Mr. Wade for committee. There's a sense of, when the currents on the child, they go to the MERC, and they hold approximately 300 units. When they came on, and they were 2-bedroom units, and they were the first for $2,700 a month for 2 bedrooms, and 300 units hit the market on the same time. Did those rents go down, or did they maintain the rents, and if you don't have that information currently, we look into that for committee?
We do not have that information, but that would be part of the economic feasibility analysis that is going to be conducted.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council. Last but not least, I open up to questions from the board of survey plan. Mr. Maloney?
For you, to the attorneys, I'm just looking at the district spot, I think this is awesome. Real place. I noticed you seem to target office parks, mainly office buildings. And I'm just curious, is that mainly because the current office parks we have are generally vacant? Or not bringing in the business that you expect to be, they go to the office buildings at one point. So that presents the opportunity. The second part of the question is, the overlay district still has, or includes areas that have residences in it, so relative to account or credit that you get, do the existing houses on those districts get figured into that? Or is it only new units that get built?
I'll take the second part first. The existing housing is not counted at all. It's only what the proposed zoning ordinance would allow. With respect to your first question, we didn't specifically target office parks per se, but the idea was to find areas where we could put additional housing without creating a huge impact. We have single-family neighborhoods, we have colleges nearby, so we were trying to provide additional housing while still also producing a buffer zone between those two uses. And that was the main driving force.
If you go a little bit outside the circle, there are many more large apartments that are very, within another 4 miles. How to create the circle, but also eventually expand it.
At this point, the idea was to try and create overlay districts that would meet the requirements of the state. At some point in the future, those requirements may change, and then we may look to other areas. But if we already create housing that exceeds what's needed, we may wind up in the same situation. But right now, it worked well with. Correct.
Mr. Barrett?
I also want to compliment both of you. I do have a question on the height. And the height really kind of bothered me until you said you want to make them 8 units. And to my way of thinking, this is going to be a boom for builders that are going to be, these are going to be luxury apartments. I think my suggestion would be to lower it and make it less attractive to the big builders because there's a lot of money to be made on 8 units. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Graham?
Again, for you, I want to thank the attorneys also for doing what's been said by everybody that's here. My question is on more than one principal building in a single lot. So we've done much of that on our board. But I think about, like, Robert's Challenge Plan. Is that one lot? Is that one lot that they have there? That they would, how many buildings could they put on one lot? That's what we're saying, correct?
There are actually multiple lots in Charles Bay. Yes.
Thank you for the wonderful job.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, is there any rebuttal in favor of the petition? Is there any rebuttal in opposition to the petition? Close that part of the public hearing and refer the matter to ordinance and rules. Chairman Frianti, when will survey and planning review be?
So, because we're in summer session, we've been trying to do that for the past couple of weeks. We don't have a date as of yet, but I believe we will be back to you within, I think we need to be back to you within 20 days, that recommendation. Hopefully we get that done next week or the following, but I do not have a date.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to declare a 2-minute recess so that we can shift around. Thank you. Attorney is not.
I apologize, I just wanted to make one comment because I think it's very important that he's recognized for his work. Eric Rizzo, our GIS coordinator, did yeoman's work in preparing maps for us as we were examining different models to create the zone.
Thank you for saying that. Very important part of this discussion. Thank you. 2-minute recess.